Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me for another fabulous discussion here on Guiding Star Astrology. I am so privileged today, or we are so privileged today, because today we have joining us David Warner Mathieson. David, it is such a delight to have you here on my channel.
Well, likewise, Kesenya. Am I saying your name right, Kesenya?
Yes, perfect.
Okay,
you know, a lot of people muck it up. It's a Russian name. It's a very, difficult to get your tongue around. But as an Australian, I also have a lot of difficulty with many words.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking with you, and I hope that whoever's listening gets positive things out of it. That's my hope.
I am sure they will. Yeah. Well, let me just introduce you, David. Like you've done an amazing, you have an amazing body of work. Firstly, you are the author of 9 books. I have one here. It came in the mail yesterday.
Oh, wonderful. Finally. Long trip.
It was a long trip, and I've only managed to read the first couple of pages, but I'm already hooked. So, and you've got 9 books about astrotheology and celestial metaphor. And you've also got an amazing website and an extensive YouTube catalog of videos all about the ancient stories of the world from nearly every culture and their mythological correspondence to the stars and the constellations. And so fabulous, fabulous topic. And you've been studying this fascinating topic for over 10 years. Obviously, you're well geared to this field too, because you have a master's degree in English literature. And you've spent a number of years as an instructor with the Department of English and Philosophy at the US Military Academy of West Point. Have I got that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It wasn't a number of years. It was a couple of years.
Couple of years. We'll make it sound good. Don't worry.
That's good. Yeah. But thank you. Yes.
And also something that's really impressive to we Australians is, according to your biography, you love to surf.
I do. Yes.
Have you surfed in Australia before?
I have not surfed in Australia or New Zealand, but I would love to someday. A very frightening place there with those salties that you guys have and those other things that you have. I'm on the Pacific coast here of California where, I love to surf. I've got a family that lives in Hawaii, and I'm not as good as some of your Australian stars, but it's a wonderful, it's getting in touch with the waves, if we want to become wax a little bit philosophical. It is the rhythms, all these things that you are studying and that you're looking at every day, the music of the rhythms that are set by the planets and the celestial cycles are reflected in everything that's going on Earth, including, of course, the tides and the waves all have cycles and periods and wavelengths. And
yes,
I think it probably enhances my work that I'm able to go out and do that. But there's a number of other ways you can get in touch with the cycles of the Earth.
Absolutely. Well. But that's a beautiful way. It's a really beautiful way. Now, I have to ask you, as someone with a master's in English literature, I'll give you a pop quiz. No, not really.
Okay, good.
Just for the fun of it, I just wanted to ask you, what's your favorite novel?
Yeah, well.
Or is that a too difficult question? There's too many.
No, it's a great question. It's a great question. I would say the Odyssey. Of course, the Odyssey isn't categorized as a novel, but the novel was kind of, at least what they told us, was kind of a creation of the 1700s to 1800s, the word novel, but I'll stretch the definition a little bit. And I love the Odyssey ever since I was very young. I've always loved the Odyssey. I love the Iliad too, but I love the Odyssey more than the Iliad. So I think you can read the Odyssey as your Bible, and you can read it every year and find something completely different. It'll hit you a completely different way, which is the same. The Bible, I've been to a lot of, as it sounds like you have, a lot of church services, and pastors will say that, as you read the Bible, it strikes you in different ways, in different stages that you're going through, or different experiences that you're having, or different times of life. And the Odyssey and all these great ancient treasures that are the ancient sacred stories of the planet have that quality, I think. So they're all fantastic, but I really do love the Odyssey.
Yeah.
The long-suffering Odysseus trying to get back home, and his long-suffering Penelope trying to hold everything together. She's being pursued by all these suitors, and her son is now, grown to young manhood, but he's just kind of he's lost because he hasn't had his dad around, and so he tries to be assertive, and he's not always respectful to his mother, which we probably can relate to if we have children.
Yes, indeed. I have two teenage sons, definitely.
Okay. Yeah, I have two sons as well. But you can see his son trying to be, he's trying to be a man, but he's kind of being a punk. Like a punk is someone he's got the strength, but he doesn't know how to control it the right way. And Odysseus is always trying to control his temper and his passions from running into disaster. And he's usually successful. That's really one of his distinguishing features, is that he is in control, and he's also listening to the voice of Athena, the goddess Athena. He's able to hear the gods, primarily Athena, sometimes Hermes, which all ties into recovery of self and some of the things that I've seen you write about and talk about. And that's what this story is all about, or this incredible epic is about. But sometimes he loses it, and you can see him losing it. So anyway, great question.
Yeah.
Long answer.
No, perfect answer. Because, well, when I first came across your work, I might mention how I did that a little bit later, but I was really intrigued to know how you stepped into this field. What took you here? Because, I mean, celestial metaphor, astrotheology, it's really quite a niche field. I only know of one other astrotheologist, and I figured there must be some captivating pull from the universe that took you down this road. And I'd love to hear your story, but it sounds a bit like the Odyssey might maybe have been a catalyst for you, or did your love for the Odyssey, did that exist before you discovered astrotheology?
Long before. So I grew up loving the myths and also the stars, but I didn't know that they would become this life's work. I had these books when I was a child. Maybe you have them, or some of the listeners buy. And I probably, when I was little, I didn't even know how to say their name. The Dollairs, Ingrid and Edgar Perrin Dollaire, D with an apostrophe, like a French name, Auleire, I think, Dollairs. They have these wonderful kind of coffee table sized books of the Greek myths and the Norse myths. And my grandfather came to the US from Norway, so I was always very attached to the Norse myths, of course.
Naturally.
And so I always loved the myths. From, like, I can't remember not having those books. That's how early I had those stories. And also the stars. My dad would take me out to see the stars. I had this book, not this exact copy. It looks like it's pretty old, but this is more recent, but it's still dog-eared.
That looks amazing.
This is how I I had this book and another one by H.A. Rey as well. So H.A. Rey, I talk about H.A. Rey. I didn't really prepare any slides about H.A. Rey, but I've talked about how important H.A. Rey's system is in other videos. Are you familiar with H.A. Rey, that name?
Only through what I've seen you talk about on your channel.
But
I'm going to look into it.
Yeah, most people know Curious George. He and his wife Margaret wrote. They created the Curious George stories.
Right.
But he also wrote this book. You were talking about visual astronomy, and I often say, or sometimes I say on various podcasts, there's a lot of people who know a lot about astronomy, and they can tell you what the characteristics of Sagittarius or the characteristics of Capricorn are. But even if they're experts, if you pull out a napkin, and say, hey, could you sketch the stars of Capricorn? Most of us would have a very difficult time doing that. And H.A. Rey talks about why that is, and how the systems of visualizing are so inadequate.
It's only since I've been watching your YouTube channel that I could pick that cover being Gemini that you just showed. And, you know, I've been studying astrology for years. So,
and you know all about Gemini.
Yeah, I can tell you about Gemini, but to actually visually align the constellation and to you know, to be able to pick that one on the cover of H.A. Ray's book, like I wouldn't have been able to do that a couple of weeks ago. So, yeah.
Well, that's wonderful.
Carry on.
Well, so I mean, that's a whole topic, you know, that we could explore. But the question was about whether I was into the myths before.
How did you get into what you're doing now?
And as you could probably tell from teaching at the military academy and graduating from the military academy, I was in the Army for quite some time. And while I was in the Army, I became much more devout of a literalist Christian than I ever was growing up. And that was as a result of a variety of
I'm so intrigued.
Life events. But suffice it to say that I got to the point where I was only reading the scriptures on Sunday, like nothing else. Okay. Or maybe commentaries on the scripture, you know, that would be allowed, but not the Odyssey.
Not the Odyssey. No.
It was
what denomination were you?
Oh, well.
Is that a curly one too?
No. I you know, my family grew up, we would go to Presbyterian services, but you know, not rigorously.
Yeah.
But then I became basically Baptist. So you mentioned Baptist.
Yes, my background as well. Mm-hmm.
I became, you know, pretty devout Baptist, and then I became more Reformed Baptist, and that led to becoming basically Presbyterian again, but the more Reformed kind of Presbyterian. So that's
a whole circle.
Actually it ended up with like the more strict Westminster Confession type Presbyterian. Not to go too deep into that subject, but basically I would still love the myths and the stars. But what happened was much later, after I'd gotten out of the Army, I was no longer teaching at West Point. My parents were going to Machu Picchu in Peru. And I wanted to get my mom a present. And I got her this book by Graham Hancock and his wife Sanfa. Yeah,
Graham Hancock.
Yeah, and it was Heaven's Mirror, which is not necessarily the most well-known of his books, but it's fantastic, beautiful photographs by Sanfa, and like full color, glossy, full page kind of lots of Machu Picchu and some South Pacific sites. So wonderful book. I got it from my mom, but then I was, you know, well, let me look into this Graham Hancock. I got it because mysteries and ancient sites that are mysterious.
Machu Picchu.
Yeah, perfect. But then I started looking at his videos on YouTube. You know, this was probably around 2008, maybe. And actually I went to New Zealand in 2009, and I was starting to explore some things on the internet about some of the alignments of Easter Island. Anyway, but in Graham's work, of course, he mentions this very seminal book called Hamlet's Mill that was published in 1969. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it is a wonderful book. And it was written in 69 by two professors who were getting up in years when they wrote it, probably in their 60s or 70s, and they've both long since passed away, but they were sketching out evidence for an ancient worldwide system of number and weights and measures and myth. And so I was in connections to stars and mostly planets. So they would mostly try and connect to the planets. They did not have access to the H.A. Ray constellations outlines. You can see that in their diagrams. And so they miss a lot, but their work is very confusing the way they write it. I've probably read it literally 10 times by now, but it is convoluted at places. And sometimes they'll say things like, well, the reader gets what we're talking about, or, this is too big of a subject for us to go into, but you get the idea. And you're going, wait a minute. No, you haven't given enough, probably because they didn't quite tie it all together, which is, you know, I'm criticizing it, but I'm giving them credit for the fact that they saw this vast
connection.
Yeah, around the world, like a ruin lying in the, and they even use kind of evocative metaphors like that, that, you know, there's this ancient echoing, you know, construction, but it was already in ruins by the time the ancient Greeks arrived. And it's in the myths of ancient Egypt, and it's in the myths of the Americas. And of course, I was just fascinated by that and had to really dive into. So this is all a long answer to your question, but I became kind of like, you know, my house is all pretty much, you know, naked, nothing in it right now. But I pretty much was one of those kind of strings all over, you know, the border with all the red yarn going. I wanted to
like on a
out,
CSI or something,
exactly.
linking all the synchronicities.
Exactly. So I had to really pursue what they were talking about. And every now and then in that book, they will mention, well, you know, the story of Samson, of course, or, well, you know, the book of Revelation is also based on the system. And I would say, well, you know, of course, they're just some secular college professors. Of course, they don't understand that those are all literal, true stories. I know, you know, that Samson was really, you know, the strongest
man in Israel.
Did all those things, right? So I kind of rejected and pushed those things away. But what happened was I started to basically decode the system, or start to put together the grammar. It's like creating a dictionary and then starting to be able to kind of see, you know, how the sentences fit together in the ancient myths. And the evidence becomes so overwhelming once you start to see how the system works, that the Bible, all the stories in the Bible, or what we call the Bible, which really means a collection of books. So it's already a collection, biblio. You know, the Greek word was plural. So it's like the books, not the book. And so all those stories that are collected into what today we call this one book of the Bible. And there's debates over whether, you know, for instance, the book of Enoch should be in there. But all those stories are celestial, and they're using the same system. So they're using the same system of celestial metaphor that underlies the Greek myths, the stories of the Odyssey, the same system of celestial metaphor that underlies the Norse myths, the stories in the Americas, the sacred traditions of the cultures of North America, also the Maya, the Pacific, the vast cultures that basically it was a unified system of language and culture, the largest culture on earth, really, from stretching from Hawaii all the way to New Zealand or Aotearoa. That is the largest vast space of any culture that shares myths and language. You know, they have some language pronunciation differences, but they're really linguistic differences of the same language. Anyway, that Maui stories are based on it. The China and Japan, the stories of ancient Japan, the different kami, the different deities of Japan, Mesopotamia, Sumer, Babylon, India, of course, vast, you know, amounts of texts that we have from the Vedas, the ancient Sanskrit epics, the Upanishads are based on this same underlying system, can be shown with just abundant evidence to be operating. So the Bible is related to all these. It's just another version.
Yeah. I mean, how many myths had stories of the virgin birth? You know, there was Attis and, oh God, they were escaping me now, but there was at least 5 around at the time.
Sure. Dionysus had 2 mothers, and one of them was a virgin birth. And there's actually Perseus, the hero Perseus, who goes off to find Medusa. His mother, Danae, basically was, you know, there was a prophecy. Her father was told, well, you know, your beautiful daughter, she will have a son who will kill you and take over the kingdom. And he said, well, that's no good. Let me lock her in a stone or a copper chamber under the earth, and that'll prevent any sort of grandson of mine from killing me. And Zeus, of course, sees what's going on and descends and goes into the stone chamber. And so basically the servants come back a few days later after feeding her and say, you know, that daughter of yours, king, or a few months later, I guess, she's pregnant. So that's another virgin birth. But there's also babies being put into the water is a very, very
common
repeated pattern around the world. They're in the Mahabharata of ancient India, baby Karna, who's also basically a virgin birth. There's virgin births in the Mahabharata, a bunch of them actually. There are a few of them when the mother of the Pandavas is given some mantras to say, to call different gods to show up. But there's a baby who's put into the water by a virgin mother who, you know,
yeah.
There's a baby who's put into the water in Japan. The leech child Hiruko is still very well known today. This deity is a fisherman, the fisherman god. There's Perseus is put into the water with his mother in an ark. Baby Moses, of course, is put into the water in an ark. Sargon in ancient Mesopotamia. There's an ancient text, you know, attributed to Sargon where he says, you know, my mother put me into the waters. She was a priestess of Isis and she put me into the waters. So this pattern, how does that show up over and over again around the world?
Everywhere.
And with very similar details, like the ark that the baby is put into is slimed over with pitch.
Yes.
In stories around the world. And baby Maui, of course, is thrown into the sea foam by his mother. There's lots of different versions of the Maui story, but in one version, he's cast into the sea foam and then he's rescued by his powerful grandfather figure that lifts him up. And these are celestial. They can be shown to be based on the stars. And I can kind of show what that means because I keep saying it. And people may be saying, what is this assertion that everything is celestial? How does that work? And I'll show you what I'm talking about.
So it was this fascination with this book by H.A. Rey that got you into a whole new field of astrotheology, and you've just done the deep dive ever since. But you already had the foundation in mythology prior to that.
Yeah, in Bible.
And the Bible.
So I had to make a decision, you know, as I found more and more evidence. Am I going to keep taking the Bible literally, which I had, you know, incorporated that into quite a bit of who I was, or quite a bit of, you know, who I thought I was, my identity. And I believe these stories are actually empowering and uplifting, and they don't have to be literal in order to be true. You know, people say, whoa, you're saying the Bible's not true? Moses is a constellation? Yes, Moses can be shown to be a constellation, but that doesn't mean it's not talking about profound truths that we need today. In fact, it's even more applicable to your life if it's esoteric, metaphorical, rather than, well, there was this Samson figure who was tremendously strong, but I'm obviously not the strongest man in the world. So how applicable is that to my life? Well, no, it's actually a esoteric metaphor about all kinds of things. Or Solomon in the judgment between the two mothers. Two mothers is another pattern, you know, the judgment of Solomon.
Yes.
You might say, well, that's all well and good for Solomon. He was gifted with this divine wisdom that nobody's ever had before or since. No, it's actually about you. The stories are actually, every single story is about each and every man and woman on the planet. And that's a paraphrase of a quotation by someone that I like a lot, Alvin Boyd Kuhn, Kuhn, who I reference a lot, but he says somewhere that you don't really apprehend or grasp the true message that these myths are trying to get across to you until you see yourself as the central figure. You're Samson, you're Solomon, you're King Midas, you know, the foolish king. You've got all those things going on. Or you're Inanna, the goddess who goes down
into the
depths. You have access to that. So that's it was like a transformation for me. So anyway, that's a long answer to your question.
It's a wonderful answer. So all these celestial metaphors actually have a message for us. They're very pertinent for us. And that's pretty much the crux of what you're doing now, is revealing that message to us.
Well, I'm trying to decipher it. Let's say it's not always plain or easy to grasp. I'm convinced that they are operating on multiple layers, multiple levels. This is just amazing in its sophistication and subtlety, this ancient system. And but I'm convinced that its central message is recovery of self, and the division from self.
A recovery of self from trauma or from loss. And see, I find this very interesting in what you're doing, and I just obviously I love what it is that you're doing, David. I think you have been given a very special mission, quite frankly, to undo the brainwashing, the dogma, the conditioning that we've been in for the whole age of Pisces, basically the last 2 to 4,000 years. And you'd be familiar with the Kali Yuga idea, and lower level of consciousness and what have you. I can't remember the guy who in 300 BC AD labeled Neptune as the governor of the sign of Pisces, even though Neptune as a planet hadn't yet been discovered. And Neptune was discovered in 1846. And so we've been under this influence of Neptune, and in astrology, or Neptune or Pisces in the age of Pisces. And in astrology, Neptune is the planet of deception, to be deceived, have the wool pulled over your eyes, for things not to be clear, for things to be foggy. And so I feel we have been in a 2,000-year age of being very deceived by the church and by dogma and things that I've just described. And now we're coming out of that. And so I see what you're doing is bringing back to light these ancient celestial metaphors that have a message for us in their clarity, in their original intent. And it's a beautiful mission that I think you have. So I'm in great admiration of the big important work you're doing. It's wonderful. So
thanks so much for that kind message of encouragement. And
keep doing what you're doing. It's amazing. And I think I mentioned before we started recording that I'm getting into visual astrology at the moment. And I think a lot of astrologers actually are harking back to the visual approach to astrology, which is particularly ancient from Babylon and Mesopotamia, looking at what's happening in the sky and applying that to our lives on Earth. I have to ask you, with that in mind, David, a lot of astrologers will use the premise of Hermes, which is as above, so below. And so they take what's happening in the sky as a reflection of what is happening either within our hearts as individuals or within the circumstances we're experiencing collectively on the Earth. If we're not taking, say, the Bible literally, does that then correspond to the as above, so below not being accurate? How would you interpret that Hermetic principle? I hope you understand where I'm coming from there. I haven't explained that very clearly.
No, it's a great question. So, let me answer the last part first. Not at all. That I don't see any of what I'm doing as in contradiction to the principle of as above, so below at all. In fact, if the Bible is all based on celestial metaphor, I think it reinforces that principle. Now that Hermetic principle, that's what I would call Western esoteric tradition that astrology falls into. And as I've said to you in our email correspondence, I'm not an expert in I'm not an expert in anything. I've gone pretty far down this road, but I'm still learning. But what I focus on the most is the ancient myths. Now, I believe that this Western esoteric tradition that you're referring to with the Hermetica and some of the traditions that had to flow underground during that age that you just described, where the literalist, very strict, we do not do astrology, we do not do divination, we do not do, even though there's divination in every there's divination in every tradition of the world, including, of course, in the stories of the Old Testament, where there's all kinds of drawing of lots or drawing of sticks, or speckled sheep versus not speckled sheep kinds of
putting your fleece out for whether it gets wet with dew or not.
That's right.
I think that's in Judges.
That's right. And it is actually, there's divination around the world. There's casting of lots that, you know, still done in Taiwan, in the temples, and in around the world. But this esoteric tradition is partly due to this literalist, you know, clampdown that took place, where the scriptures were taught as being literal, and that's the only way that you could see them. And it's heresy to say, well, is it possible that the story of Jesus has to do with, actually, I can show it to you in the stars. I can show you the Ark of the Covenant. I can show you the, you know, the hill of the crucifixion. I can show you all these things in the sky. Is it possible that that is, in common with all the other myths of the world, by the way, the foundation for this, for these stories that have profound truths to teach? Well, when that is no longer allowed to be questioned openly, it went underground. And so this esoteric tradition that you're referring to is, I would say, after kind of the myths that I'm looking at are very ancient. And I was going to say, kind of in response to your point about the age of Pisces, the Gilgamesh story, or the story of Inanna's descent into the underworld, the goddess Inanna, where she goes down, is far, far beyond, more ancient, we believe, than the age of Pisces. So that's actually a hopeful sign that, you know, this has always been a problem. Not being connected to yourself, or traumatic, you know, the definition of trauma that I use, I get from Dr. Gabor Mate, who is a cutting edge psychologist who has dealt with addiction. And he says in every single case of addiction, it is a manifestation of alienation from yourself. And that's his definition of trauma, is not what happened to you. That's how we often use the word, well, I had this traumatic experience, but it's what your response was. The trauma was the separation that is a response to whatever happened to you.
Right.
And that is a problem in virtually all ages of humanity, I would say, judging if the myths are actually talking about that, even the most ancient ones, then it must be something that we have to deal with, even if we're not in the age of Pisces. It's important to connect with ourselves, and the myths, I'm convinced, are showing how to do that. So we can show a little bit, and I can, you know, show some visuals too. But just final thing on Neptune, I didn't know that about Neptune and Pisces. I do reference the discovery of Neptune because it's like, I reference it in one of my books, Star Myths of the World, Volume 4, which is about Norse myths. I talk about that discovery. The way they discovered it was, well, there's something out there that's, you know, causing
Uranus
an impact on, it's impacting some of these other, you know, the closer planets. So we can see its impact from the closer ones. Well, I use that as a metaphor for, we don't know where this system came from. All we can see is its impact on the cultures that we know about, ancient Egypt or the stories in the Bible, but there must be something even further out there. It's like a metaphor for it. But the god Neptune, or Poseidon, the god of the sea, is the god who pretty much has it out for Odysseus throughout the Odyssey. So throughout the Odyssey, the god who's keeping him from getting home is Poseidon. And Poseidon's angry with Odysseus because Odysseus blinded his son. One of the, you know, Poseidon's son, well, the Cyclops is one of Poseidon's many offsprings that Odysseus blinds. And then Odysseus taunts the Cyclops. He didn't have to taunt the Cyclops. He could have just gotten away and kept his mouth shut, but he had to tell the Cyclops his name. He had to make fun of the Cyclops. And then the Cyclops says, oh, Father Poseidon, look at this. This was all prophesied. I was told this was going to happen, but I didn't know it was going to be from some puny little human like this. And I pray that you will make sure this Odysseus never, ever gets home. But if he does get home, let it be after years of suffering and with all his companions dead and in a strange ship rowed by strangers. Let it just be, you know, if he has to get home, let it be miserable before he does. And that's, and Poseidon becomes furious anytime he sees Odysseus trying to get home. So it's interesting.
I don't have a great, I mean, respect Neptune in the astrological sense, but I got a bit peeved when I read of him being the one who raped Medusa in the Temple of Athena, and for which she was punished. And let's not go into too much of that detail, but I don't like him for that.
I do talk about that actually in some of my some of the things that I'm putting together right now, because what does that show, Kesenya, is trauma, right? A traumatic thing that happened to Medusa. Is it her fault? No. And what's the result? She turned into a monster. She has this power to turn people to stone. And so there's another cutting edge psychologist that I've also discovered fairly recently, Dr. Richard Schwartz.
Oh, yeah.
Who talks about, internal family systems therapy in this paradigm of exiles that we have. We have all these different personalities or all these different parts of who we are. And I'm sure you're, more familiar with this than I am, because of all the different aspects of astrology. You have this aspect to you. Well, I can be very musical, but I also can do, business type things. Is that wrong? Like, the world kind of demands, wait a minute, if you want to be a musician,
fit into this mold, follow this stream.
You can't do those other things. That's contradictory. Well, no, I've got multiple personalities, and it's not a disorder. And Dr. Richard Schwartz says we all actually have multiple personalities, and I see the myths as teaching that, absolutely teaching that, but they're united by this self. But what happens is the self gets suppressed. Anyway, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but these exiles are carrying burdens from trauma. In the Medusa story, you just mentioned it, and not many people know that's how she that's one version. There's all different versions, but that's one version. It has to do, we have these monsters inside of us. It's not their fault, but they're carrying they have poisonous radioactive characteristics. They can, and so the other parts of who we are as a defense mechanism suppress them or put them out on an island, like lonely Medusa out there on the island. And the one who can rescue those exiles, Dr. Schwartz talks about this, is self, that we all have access to. And that's what the myths are actually portraying. These figures like Inanna, who is sent down to the underworld and hung up on a hook, and all these humiliations happen to her, but she's indestructible. She's the divine self that is indestructible no matter what happened to you, no matter whatever that trauma was. You have this indestructible. It's like Osiris goes down to the underworld. He's cut up into 14 pieces.
Yeah.
Jesus, is stabbed with a spear and has holes in this and crown of thorns and humiliation down into the tomb for 3 days, but indestructible. That is a picture of your suppressed self, and the reconciliation that you see, like in the story of Thomas, that is actually talking about things that are reconciliation with the different parts of you that are playing these roles that could be self-sabotaging.
Yeah.
But then you can, if you can get back in touch with self, then they can liberate those parts, just like Thomas. Hey, Thomas, would you like to, stop doubting and believe? You have to get into the right relationship with self, higher self. So there's a great example. The Medusa. So these myths are actually off-putting. They're not for children. The Medusa story, right? You love them as a child, but then when you grow up and start reading like the unexpurgated version, you're like, whoa, that's how Medusa. Oh my goodness. Well, they're based on the stars, and they're talking about things that are very real in our lives, that have very real applicability. This is not like, pie in the sky. No. This applies to our real traumas that we have in our life.
Yeah, well, I think the whole Medusa mythology is going to be very pertinent towards the end of this year. There's an eclipse coming up, and it's within reference of the star Algol, which is in the head of Medusa in the constellation of Perseus. And whenever there's an eclipse at a pertinent point, we often get those themes brought out in society to deal with. So the themes of trauma and, in her case, it was the being a victim, being unjustly punished for something that she didn't do, that sort of thing. So it's going to be very interesting times. And you mentioned the underworld, and I've just done a video for my Patreon page on the Pluto return that the country of America is going to be experiencing next year. And Pluto being the god of the underworld, I think a lot of themes of bringing up the muck to be dealt with and processed, so to speak, might be very pertinent in your country next year. So but yeah, those underworld experiences are our transformation, really, I think our chance to purify our trauma. Certainly was through going through an underworld experience myself that the scales fell from my eyes, and I was able to discover the truth about literalist interpretation of, in my upbringing, the Bible, not so much other mythologies and religious things, but when I went through a very traumatic experience in my life and discovered astrology, and it all made sense and everything fell into place. And the reason I asked, sorry, I'm a bit going all over the place, but the reason I asked that question about the Hermetic principle earlier was that the reason I discovered astrology was when I realized that the three wise men were not just some dudes who saw a star bobbing along in the east. Oh, let's go follow that. That looks interesting. Toodle-doodle-doodle, and they come across a child in a manger. It was never like that, which is what we're told in Sunday school what happened. When I realized that they were wise men, they were rich people from the east of Jerusalem, being namely sort of Babylon and Mesopotamia, it was, of course, they had to be astrologers who had studied the stars. They knew that there was an amazing constellation configuring in the sky at a certain time, which would herald the birth of an avatar. And so along they went to the place where that constellation, that conglomeration of stars would be at its most potent, which was Bethlehem. So it was in that realization that I was like, hang on a minute, I've been told astrology is evil and, like you said earlier, had to go underground for many years, and Dante's Inferno had us at the lowest level of hell, I believe. So it was liberating to discover that, but that's actually a literal interpretation of that biblical story, a historical interpretation of that biblical story. So
I didn't want to contradict it.
yeah. So to me, it's curious that, I mean, there's probably a constellational reference. I imagine it's probably the belt of Orion or something with 3 stars that one corresponds to.
Well, I can show it to you. Show it to you. But I mean, so, but the larger theme that you're talking about in your personal history too, and I've got on one slide a picture of a lot of my books, and the most recent book was published in 2020 is Myth and Trauma, and I spend a lot of time in that book wrestling with this issue of are the myths for inflicting trauma, or is the Bible, some people say, well, the Bible is this oppression system, or the Babylonians came up with it first, and then they, or it's a system for oppression. But I find abundant evidence that it is about healing trauma. It is for healing trauma, but it can be used to inflict trauma. And some of the metaphors that I think are helpful in that, like I use Kung Fu, for example. You can use Kung Fu, if you think of martial arts movies, the really wise Kung Fu person is going to use it to, well, that's right. That was, I actually was very influenced by Kung Fu, that TV series with Grasshopper. I had a Kung Fu lunchbox. I've never revealed that on any podcast before. And I didn't even know, like I was so young, I must've been in like first grade. I had this lunchbox that said Kung Fu over 3,000 years old. And there was this, image of David Carradine's character there with his shaved head. And I was like, how is that guy over 3,000 years old? I just don't get it, But but it can be used for, so the wise figure that you're, you know, the kind of stereotypical wise Kung Fu master uses it to prevent oppression, you know, uses it very sparingly, but only when absolutely necessary, then for stopping, you know, rape, or for stopping exploitation, or for stopping, but it can also be used to bully and traumatize, right? And we see, you know, the bad guy is usually a Kung Fu master who's evil, you know,
yeah,
and so it's the same thing. Yeah. So the ancient myths are very powerful for healing trauma, but they can also, and have been, twisted to use to inflict trauma. Or think of a psychologist, this is even more disturbing metaphor, but think of a psychologist who really understands the human psyche and is supposed to be using it to heal his or her patients that are coming to her with trust and, you know, spilling their issues and deepest secrets. But that psychologist is actually trying to mess them up even worse. Could a psychologist do even more damage than you or I, not non-expert? Yeah, they could.
Yeah.
So, you know, if they were a bad, like a deliberately bad, malevolent psychologist, would be terrifying to think about. And yet that seems to be what has happened with these precious, wonderful myths that are supposed to be,
absolutely,
healing trauma. They can also be used, and have been used, and are still being used, to inflict tremendous trauma.
Yeah.
And that's
often
horrendous.
Unknowingly, by people with innocent intent, but
that's
yeah.
Right. That's right. So do you want me to show you some stars?
I know I could talk all day, but let's dive into a few constellations and stories.
Yeah, let me share my screen. See how it works. I didn't practice first, so, but I think I've got it all set. So this is Stellarium. I'll just pull this up.
I love Stellarium.
Yeah, or Stellarium, however they say it, but I say Stellarium.
Me too.
Yeah, sounds like you do too. And I've got the planets in here. I could even.
Is this
today? This is right now. Well, you know, this is today where I am. It's yesterday for where you are.
Yes.
But, you know, Stellarium is really wonderful. And when we pull in the constellations, this is the HA outlining system. So it's open source, it's free. People can find it on stellarium.org. Obviously I'm not paid by them to say that, but if you go to the star lore here, it'll default to Western. Which are terrible outlines, but you can select HA Ray right there.
They're also, I follow lectures from an Indigenous astronomy group at the Australian National University, and they've been inputting the Australian Indigenous into Stellarium, which is really exciting. Anyway,
that's
sorry.
Wonderful. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. And it's probably up here somewhere if we were to look. So just in reference to your the three kings, I don't know if I don't want to ruin the story for you.
No, you can go for it. That's fine. I'm still going to be an astrologer.
Yes, no, I think that's great. And like I said, they apply to our lives. That's the proper way to try and understand, well, what is it trying to say actually to where I am right now? But there's no way that story is actually an example that I use a lot. And I use the interpretation. I'm not the first person to see that the Bible stories are based on the stars, of course. If it's correct, you would expect other people throughout the centuries to see it. And I don't know if the astronomer you were thinking of was Macrobius, who said that Neptune was associated with Pisces.
No, it was Menelaus. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Macrobius was a little bit later, like 400 AD. But Macrobius, gives evidence in his writings that he understands connections between myths and stars. Plato, I'm convinced, gives evidence in his writings, little hints that he understands the connection, or he understands that they're metaphorical and not literal. He even has a dialogue where someone is saying, oh, isn't this the spot where the young woman was captured by the winds? The god of the winds snatched her up from the stream. And he says, well, some philosophers have all kinds of time to sit around and dream up that kind of nonsense, but I think it's completely misguided. And then he proceeds to talk about know thyself and and that's what it's all about. And if you spend all this time chasing that, you won't know yourself. And I think that's Plato's way of saying the stories are actually metaphorical, and they're about know thyself. And if you run off after these literalistic, it's in the Timaeus, I think, the dialogue of Plato. But anyway, this story of the three kings is a good one for showing that the stories of the Bible cannot be literal, because you said it already. Which direction did they see the star?
From the east.
Yeah, they're from the east. It says right in Luke chapter 2. No, but they see it in the east.
Oh, okay.
So that gives it, that's problematic, isn't it? I mean, if you look at Luke, you said it earlier. You said they saw the star in the east, because it quite clearly says 2 times they followed a star in the east. But it also says they were wise men from the east. So how, if they came from the east, let's say Mesopotamia area, did they get to Jerusalem following a star in the
east? Yeah,
east.
Good point.
Well, obviously they went across China, then they went to Japan, then they crossed the Pacific and got to the Americas, then they went all the way, continuing to the east to New York, then they got on the boat again, and they went to the Mediterranean, and they came in on a boat to, Bethlehem or Jerusalem or, the east. That's the only way to get there, following a star in the east, if it's terrestrial. But if it's celestial, which of course it is, here's, and you said, well, maybe it's the three kings, and it never says in the text, I'm sure Bible scholars will immediately jump in and say, oh, it doesn't say 3 kings. It doesn't, but we have the tradition that it's 3 kings. How did we get that tradition?
That's right.
Well, you can see here, Orion, as you said, well, maybe it must have something to do with Orion's belt. It could have something to do with Orion's belt. So here's Orion. I'm looking towards the south. I'm in the northern hemisphere. So for me to see the zodiac, I have to look southward. You have to look the other way because you're in Australia. But if I were to just go backwards in the day a little bit, we can see that Orion and his 3 stars are coming. They're rising. Where are they rising from? The east, of course. The stars and the sun too, and the moon and the planets rise in the east and set in the west because of the direction that the earth is turning. And
Can we just point, for people who aren't familiar with the sky, just point where Orion is? Do you have the constellational art, or do you not like using the...
I do have the art. I don't really like it.
Yeah, don't worry if you don't.
Yeah, but I'll show it up here. Where is it? Maybe there? No, I guess. Should be right there, but...
Don't worry if you don't like using it.
In any case, yeah, this is the outline of Orion. These are the 3 belt stars. And I have some slides prepared to show you, because you wanted to ask about the Genesis 6 passage. So I've got some slides where I outline. But just in light of how could they come from the east and then get to the star and then see the star in the east. Here they are rising in the east, as all stars do, rise in the east as we turn. They're heading towards the west. So they're traveling from the east, long journey. Here they go. They're going, I'll speed it up. I'll go, instead of going by minutes, I'll go by hours here. Now, oh, here comes the sun. We can turn that off just so that not a distraction. I'm going to take out the solar system objects for now. But you can, of course, see all the planets, as you know.
Yeah.
Since it sounds like you're very familiar with Stellarium. But here they are, reaching their highest point in the sky and continuing to the east as they eventually, here comes Leo the lion, which we know that Leo comes right before, if we know our astrology, we know that the sign of Leo, or the sun travels through Leo before it gets to Virgo. So here comes Virgo. So here comes, as they're traveling from the east, they look across and they see Virgo here. This is the Virgin, Virgo the Virgin. You see how she's lying on her back, as if giving birth, actually. She goes across the sky, in the northern hemisphere perspective anyway, on her back with her legs elevated and raised, okay? So often that's it appears in different stories as if she's giving birth, and we'll see one in a bit. Sometimes it's also as if she's having sex, obviously that could also be an interpretation, and the myths are not shy about that. In fact, we have, we have Abraham and Sarah, the Bible says, well, they were sporting together. And then the Egyptian king says, sporting together. And then the Egyptian king says, well, wait a minute, you said she was your sister. I think she's your lover, not your sister. I think she's probably your wife because I saw you sporting together. It's the same. It's a story that they're having sex. It's based on these constellations. The different, sometimes bizarre stories can almost always be traced back to specific details of a constellation. But anyway, here comes Virgo, and she has the distinctive aspects of Virgo. One is, as I already said, going across the sky on her back, legs elevated and raised apart, elevated and apart, as if giving birth. That's the way, if you've been to where someone's giving birth, that's basically how they set it up. But she also has a couple other distinctive features: a long head, this elongated head. Now, it's really interesting, the Australian indigenous sacred traditions, there's a story about a bandicoot woman who has a bandicoot, characteristics in some way. So this elongated head of Virgo, I would argue, has, that's who the bandicoot woman is in the Australian story. There's a story about the fire. Bandicoot has kind of a longish pointed nose, right? It's like a mousy kind of little animal there. I mean, there's lots of different kinds of bandicoots, but I put a picture of them in one of my books. But there's a story in the myths of the Maya of a goddess, a grandmother goddess, who's called the Kawadi woman, or the Kawadi goddess. Kawadi Mundi is a type of a ring-tailed, kind of a raccoon-like, it's a rodent that runs around. I've seen them when I was in the army in Panama. They run around, they're really intelligent. They move in kind of military formations, little squads through the jungle. They're super smart. They, we would joke, they pull security for one another, just like an army squad would moving through the jungle. But they have a long snout. So the bandicoot goddess, or the Kawadi Mundi goddess, I'm pretty convinced has to do with this elongated head here. But it could also be a veil, right? Like women had to wear veils. Like a lot of these headgear traditions actually come from the stars. Perseus has a pointed Phrygian cap, and there are figures in myth who wear that specific hat. So anyway, she also has this another distinctive aspect of her constellation is this outstretched arm. It's very distinctive. In fact, this is Spica, her brightest star. It's like worn right on her hip. H.A. Ray says, that's like her brightest jewel. She wears it like a sash around her waist, or it's like a jewel right there on her hip there. But her second brightest star is this one. It's called Vinda Meatrix. It means the grape plucking feminine ending, like R-I-X is a feminine ending, just like it becomes like R-E-S-S in English, like actress. We don't use actress anymore, but like dominatrix is R-I-X. That's a feminine ending. This is Vinda Meatrix. It's a feminine ending that becomes S in English, like a lioness. So this is the feminine grape plucking hand. Vin means wine or grapes. So this is her grape plucking hand. Well, that's where the Virgin carries her baby. That's, if you see pictures of the Virgin Mary, that's where Jesus is sitting, that star. Or if you see pictures of Isis with Horus on her lap, that's exactly in the position. The baby is sitting on her lap nursing. So that's his star right there. So when they say we saw his star in the east, look, they're over here now. They've been traveling from the east, but then they see his star in the east because they saw it rising. And actually up here is Cancer, right before Leo. And in the head of Cancer, there's this beautiful little beehive cluster. It's a super important cluster, the beehive. And it's an ancient name for beehive. The beehive cluster was actually Prisepi, which means the manger, the manger. And these two stars right here on either side of the manger, I'm going to zoom in and show you the beehive cluster. You see the beehive cluster? It's beautiful. You can see it in the sky when Leo is up. You can kind of follow his muzzle towards the beehive cluster. But these two stars on either side, very close to the beehive, flanking the beehive cluster in Cancer, which is a very faint constellation. But if I click on this star, you'll see the name of the star. Maybe they don't put it up here. It's these Acellus Borealis and Acellus australis, the northern ass colt or donkey colt, and the southern donkey colt. So this is the manger right here. This is all the interpretation from this preacher in the 1800s, Robert Taylor, who was basically put into prison for talking like this and lost his job. But that's the manger, according to his argument, and I agree. So let me just finish up that story. So I think it's pretty convincing that it's celestial, because in the text itself, it says, being warned of Herod's anger, they went back to their home. Do you remember what it says in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, towards the end of that, or 3, maybe it's 2 or 3.
Yeah, but they went back without informing Herod of the
That's right.
birth, yeah.
And they went back another way. They didn't go back. So how did they get back to the east? Well, they went under the horizon. Yeah, they went, that's what it's talking about. They went another way. They went that way. So that's just a very kind of a taste of what it means that the stories are based on the stars. Let me show you. I could stay in Stellarium the whole time, but
yeah.
But to show it to people more easily, I did create a little slide presentation. You know, if we need to cut this off because it's going too long, I don't know if it's midnight.
I'm not
there
concerned about time. Okay. If you're not, David.
Okay, great. Let me share some slides with your audience. So here we are where I am, still 9 September. And just I put this up here by way of showing the evidence is overwhelming. This is like over 5,000 pages with illustrations. Not one book 5,000 pages, but some of them, like Star Myths of the Bible, is 766 pages or something. So these are thick books with lots of diagrams, and I'm learning as I go along. So, you know, some of my interpretations from, you know, I think you've got The Undying Stars from 2014. If you don't have it, it's coming your way.
Oh, did I? Okay, good.
It's in transit. But, you know, some of the interpretations over the years, hey, I got to kind of refine that a little bit. I think I'm understanding the language a little better now. But all this to say, the evidence is overwhelming. The evidence is abundant. And this just barely scratches the surface. So this is a diagram. This actually shows pretty much where we were a minute ago. Yeah. This is showing the Milky Way, and I'm looking south, and I'm in the Northern Hemisphere. So one thing, when I got to New Zealand, I said, boy, I love this country. I could live here. There's, you know, wonderful things here, but everything's upside down in the heavens. You know, I don't think I could handle that.
But aren't our stars amazing down here? We have,
yes, they are,
such an incredible view. Like the solar system sits kind of above the Milky Way, and we down under get to look out on it. So anyhow, go ahead.
No, it's wonderful. And you can see southern stars, obviously, that we can't see up here because of the curve.
I've got to ask you, I'm just so curious. I see Ophiuchus there where your pointer is resting. Do you think he should be part of the Zodiac or not? That's a controversial question, isn't it?
That's a super, super important question, Kesenya, because as I've gone along, and this is one of the things that's really developed over time, because early in my journey of seeing this, I didn't realize how important Ophiuchus is. And some people also pronounce it Ophiuchus. I say Ophiuchus. It means the serpent holder, and I'm going to outline it right now. So there it is. Can you see my outline?
Yeah.
This is the HA ray outline, and you can see it is a central body that is like a tombstone kind of a shape, or an oblong shape, holding a serpent. And the foot of Ophiuchus, well, one foot, you can see one foot's in the Milky Way, and one foot's not in the Milky Way. Can you see that? There's a foot that's in the Milky Way, and it extends down, right down in between Scorpio. That's Scorpio, that Ophiuchus is standing right above Scorpio. And in between Scorpio and Sagittarius. Sagittarius is pointing a bow right at Scorpio. And so the foot of Ophiuchus, the sun and the planets, the ecliptic, does travel through Ophiuchus.
Yeah.
So Ophiuchus is the 13th zodiac sign, as you know, by that question, I know that you're aware of that controversy. Or was it kicked out? I believe, and in fact, I'm convinced, the further I go with my exploration, that the 13th sign is hidden and obscured for a reason. And it's not always a he, it can be a she. So Ophiuchus plays the role, all the constellations play the role of both male figures and female figures. It's like we only have so many actors, and they got to dress up in different roles and play with different accents here and there because they show up over and over in these different myths. So Ophiuchus plays male figures, as we'll see, but also female figures. The goddess Athena, beyond doubt, is associated with Ophiuchus. And so long answer to question is that the hidden sign of the zodiac is, it's part of the zodiac, but not part of the zodiac. That is actually, I argue, and I'm really convinced of this the more I go, higher self is part of you, but also connected to the invisible realm. That is the pivot. That is the gear shift. That is the transmission, if you will. That is the part of you that's not just one of your parts. That's the divine self has very similar characteristics in everybody. So you and I have very different, mix of gifts that we were given, at birth by the stars or by the gods or by, all the confluences that went into who you are and who I am. And we may have some similar aspects, but we also probably have some very different aspects. I've got this mix of skills and talents and gifts and likes and weaknesses, and everyone does. But we all have higher self or self. And this is what Dr. Richard Schwartz talks about. And he discovered this, not necessarily by looking for it. In fact, not by looking for it. This contradicted what he was taught and what he was looking for, but that no matter what trauma anyone has gone through, they still, no matter what, have this indestructible self that has these characteristics of curiosity and courage and compassion and connection. And he uses all these words that begin with C. And that isn't a part. So there's these different parts that will take on roles, like a cutting part. He was dealing with mostly young girls, like teen girls, who were cutting themselves. And he would try and argue with it. Well, can we get the cutting part in here to talk about why it's doing this? Okay, the cutting part is here, and then he would interrogate or question the cutting part. Why are you doing this? Well, I have to do it because of whatever. And then he would say, well, can the cutting part, go sit down? Or there are these different parts that we have. And sometimes he would be talking to a patient that he was helping, and he would say, now, what part am I talking to now? And she would say, well, this is not a part. This is me. This is who I am. This is my really deepest self. That's what Ophiuchus is, a part of all your other, it's a member of who you are, but it's different. It's not the same as these other parts. It's like the coach of the team. It's like the difference between a coach and the players. The players have all these different skills and talents, but the coach is the one that knows, oh, this is the time that I need this defensive player. This is the time that I need this player. He's got a hot temper, I know, but this is when I want that player in the game. That's the difference between the self, higher self, and these different parts that are different in everybody and that can get hung up. And so Ophiuchus is depicting that for us, is part of that. We all have these different gifts and they line up with the zodiac signs, but Ophiuchus is in the zodiac, but not above it.
So it's the more detached observational component where it's
and connected to the divine, and it's above, it's connected to divine. So this is Ophiuchus, though. There's how you spell it. I spelled it wrong, in my writings for a long time. I didn't have that second H in my Ophiuchus. But anyway, there it is. But right next to the Milky Way, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And Ophiuchus plays a lot of important figures. And I just wanted to show how Ophiuchus plays a couple Bible figures by way of answering your question of, hey, what about this Genesis 6 passage where the sons of God come down and are attracted to the daughters of men? Okay, let's take a look at that. To show you that, I've got to lead you down this path here.
For everybody who's not familiar with that Bible passage, it's where some beings called the Nephilim are involved with humanity before the flood, and the Nephilim, the giants, and I think the Bible refers to them as the kings of old, or the heroes of old, at least, is how I think it's phrased from memory.
That's right. Yeah, mighty men of renown is, I think, the way it might be translated in King James, but it's found in Genesis chapter 6, right there, starting in verse 1. But I'm going to go to some different Bible stories just to show, I've been saying throughout, it's all based on the stars. All the stories are based on the stars. The Bible stories are based on the stars. The figures in the Bible, the characters are based on the stars, same as in the myths. It's the same system. So let me just introduce Ophiuchus to everybody. Ophiuchus has a serpent. He's holding a serpent. You can see that. And I just put some arrows there. Tail side is pointing kind of into the Milky Way, and there's the head side. You see the little head. And I've got a diagram there, and I kind of got an old picture of a serpent there to kind of show it. And what's going on here, or what figures in the Bible could Ophiuchus play? Well, Ophiuchus plays a lot of very important pivotal figures. In fact, Ophiuchus looks like a pivot. Ophiuchus is the pivot. It's like the pivot between, our physical and spiritual. It's the pivot. It's through getting in touch with self that we can start to hear the voice of the gods. Remember how I said that Odysseus had to listen to Athena, or he would have met with disaster over and over, or Hermes in different parts of the story. Same thing with Perseus. He's wandering off to try and get Medusa, and Hermes and Athena again show up and say, hi, Perseus, we know that you're a powerful hero, son of Zeus. You're just, at the peak of your strength. What are you up to? Oh, I'm off to get the head of Medusa and bring it back. Okay. Do you know anything about what you're doing? Well, I know that I'm strong, and I've been in lots of fights, and I'm sure I can handle it. Well, you have no idea about Medusa, do you? And if he didn't listen to them, he would have ended up just like all the other heroes that tried to go fight Medusa. He would have been turned into stone. So the ability to get that voice of inspiration is critical. And the way it comes in is through, I'm convinced the myths are showing, through connection with self. So higher self, or deeper self, or it's called many different things, Atman in the Hindu and ancient Vedic traditions. So Ophiuchus plays that figure, and this is the Milky Way. And I've outlined it this way because there's this dark rift, or this dark path.
Yes, I think in indigenous cultures, it's the emu in the sky, which designates when it's time to go hunt emu eggs based on its angle of rising and setting. Yeah, it's fascinating. Sorry.
Yeah, super. No, that's absolutely not off topic at all. It plays all these different roles in different myths and sacred stories and traditions. It's a birth canal in the Maya traditions. And John Major Jenkins, the late John Major Jenkins, argued and explained about that when 2012 was happening. But it could also be a pathway. Sometimes there's a myth about a descent into the underworld, a lot of times, where, such as Orpheus going down to bring back Eurydice, his beloved bride who's bitten by a snake. Orpheus, the great singer with the harp. This pathway across sometimes a body of water. So could you see how the Milky Way could be a stream? It could also be a column of smoke. It could be a lot of things. It could be a Red Sea. Very good. Number one answer, Kesenya. We're leading right into this. So who's holding who? So there's the Milky Way, and here's this pathway across. The Milky Way could be a Red Sea. Now I'm going to take away so you can see it. Can you see the path? Now all your viewers can see. If they better probably to watch this on a bigger screen than maybe a cell phone, but maybe you're able to see it. Can you see that dark path and how Ophiuchus is holding a serpent's tail right towards the path? And now that serpent's tail, you could connect it this way. Figures that are associated with Ophiuchus will often carry a spear. Like I told you, Athena is definitely an Ophiuchus figure. She carries a spear. But sometimes it's a staff. It doesn't have to be a spear. Who carries a staff or a rod and points it out over the Red Sea to cross the Red Sea? Well, that would be, of course, Moses. Does his staff have anything to do with serpents at any time in the Bible? Yes,
Yes,
that's like
indeed.
one of the proving, well, how will they know that I was sent by you? And then the Most High God says, throw your staff down on the ground and it becomes a serpent. And
Yeah.
then later he also lifts up a serpent, the brazen serpent.
Yeah.
So this is the
Wound
staff.
around a star, wound around the
Right. There it
staff. Yeah,
is.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
There it is. That's one picture from 1600s, early 1600s. There's Moses he's got kind of a red, he's actually got his arms out on either side, kind of like Ophiuchus, and he's pointing a kind of a wand there towards the staff that he set up. And you can see the staff is kind of cross-shaped, cruciform. And if you look at Ophiuchus, you can see the cross in there. I didn't draw it in, but if you start at that triangle at the top and just drop a line straight down to the bright star in Scorpio, Antares, that red star beneath the feet of Ophiuchus, you'll see the cross there. So the staff of Moses that points out into the Red Sea to cross the Red Sea. Oh, I made it bigger so people could see. This is an episode in I want to say Exodus, but the staff that has serpents on it. Moses is clearly an Ophiuchus figure. There's no doubt in my mind he's an Ophiuchus figure. And there are artwork, this is fascinating, down through the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, showing Moses in Ophiuchus type postures and poses. And sometimes there's Scorpio type postures and poses. Not
Do you
as
think
clear
they
on this
were
one.
aware, the artists, or do you think they sort of channeled information, that they're reflecting that?
Yeah, I don't know. I suspect there's an underground preservation of this wisdom down through the centuries, but not necessarily taught. It's not necessarily, look, artists did have to kind of graduate from the academy. If you wanted to be an artist in Europe in the 1600s, it's not like you could easily make a living just selling your art to, the average person. So you had to have this patron, who would support your habit, right, of painting, and the patron would support you, but you pretty much had to be kind of an approved artist. You had to show enough skill to get into the academy. And in those academies, I would guess that they said, look, this is the way we paint Mary. And
yeah,
I showed you Virgo. They paint Mary with an outstretched arm and in the posture of Virgo quite a lot. Da Vinci does in his first painting that he did when he was like 17 is the Annunciation to Mary. It's quite striking, the parallels to I've shown it in a lot of others. I didn't really emphasize it in this one because I wanted to drive on to the Genesis 6 thing that you asked about, but
we'll get
it's
there.
It's a very good question because I think they may have been taught this is kind of the conventions that these are acceptable poses for Samson, or they may not have been taught that because it relates to the stars, or maybe they were, or maybe, like you said, it was just channeled information, not just, but maybe it was something different, channeled information. So it could be, I have no idea. It could be, divine inspiration.
Anyway, it's come through. It's quite uncanny that
it's beyond doubt. I mean, it's over and over. I show it, in videos and things people can check out on my website or on my blog posts and whatnot. So let me see how this could relate to our Genesis 6 story. So there's Moses with a staff. Where did I go from here? Oh, yes. I haven't talked about this. I've written about it in some of my books, but I haven't talked about this, but we have to know which figure plays sometimes the figure of the Almighty God.
Yeah, good question. I mean,
and in many myth systems, the most powerful god is associated with this constellation, Hercules. It's the constellation we call Hercules, but it does play the figure of Hercules. And if you look at ancient Greek artwork, you'll see Hercules almost always depicted in this exact posture with that deep knee bend, one weapon over his head. I show it a lot, but one arm reaching down. But there's a Moses story actually that reveals that, so Zeus is associated with this constellation. The thunderbolt wielding god is associated with Hercules. So sometimes that weapon is a club, sometimes that weapon is a sword, sometimes that weapon is a thunderbolt. But Zeus is also depicted in that exact same posture. And the God of the Bible is associated with that same figure. And I could show you artwork, for instance, of Jacob's ladder, where the figure of God is placed at the top of the ladder. What could be the ladder? Milky Way. See there? Yeah. And in that, in the artwork, that sword becomes a billowing cloak kind of arching over the head of the, divine God with his big beard. See, you can see why Zeus has a big square beard, right? See the square head of Hercules? Hercules himself has a big square beard, and pictures of the God of the Bible usually full beard, right? Now, like I said, it's all these constellations do play female figures as well. So even Hercules, you would think, well, that it must only play male figures. But if you look at pictures of the Gorgons, the Medusa and her sisters, they'll often have, the snake will actually look like a beard. It'll have a square-shaped head, and they'll have their tongue sticking out, just like Maui and Tiki figures have the staring eyes, and the tongue sticking out is associated with this constellation right here.
Wow,
in fact,
I didn't know that about the Tiki. Okay.
Yeah, Tikis have a square-shaped head, right? They often have a high square headdress, which Martin Dutray is an author that I was looking at about New Zealand. He has a website called Ancient Celtic or Celtic New Zealand, and he talks about the Tiki figures lining up with thunder gods from other cultures. I don't know that he made the connection to the constellation Hercules. He may have, but that square-shaped head, just like the Moai on Easter Island, have that square-shaped, sometimes a square thing on their head. So anyway, there's a passage in Exodus where you may, if you had a, kind of heavy Bible upbringing, you may have scratched your head over this. I know I did as a child. Like I said, I didn't go to church. We didn't go to church all the time, but I did hear this story about Moses said, well, I want to see your glory. It was actually, we were talking a little bit earlier about virgin births and Dionysus, and the mother of Dionysus was tricked by Hera, the wife of Zeus, into asking Zeus, show me yourself in all your glory. It's a very similar pattern, exact same pattern, because Zeus slept with this beautiful mortal woman.
Slept with everybody, didn't he?
He's always doing that. Yes, absolutely, he does. And she becomes pregnant with the god Dionysus. But then Hera finds out about it, and she's always jealous. And she says, she disguises herself as like an old woman and goes up to, I've talked about this in a recent podcast, actually, so I won't go into too much detail, but she said, is that child really the child of Zeus? And she said, oh yes, yep, that. How do you know it's really Zeus? Why don't you ask him to show, next time he comes to sleep with you, why don't you ask him to show himself in all his glory? Okay. and so she goes to Zeus and says, do you really love me? Oh yes, if you love me, promise that you'll do anything for me. Oh, whatever you want. Okay, come to me, in the bedroom in all your glory as a god. Oh, you don't want to ask that. He says, oh, ask for something else. Don't ask for that because you can't bear it.
Yeah. Which is very similar to this.
Same pattern. So Moses says, I want to see you in all your glory. And the Lord says, you can't. But I do know a way. I'll put you in the cleft of a rock.
Yeah.
And there it is in Exodus 22. While my glory passeth by, I'll put thee in the cleft of a rock, and I will cover thee with my hand. You see how Hercules is reaching down? While I pass that, and I'll take away my hand after I've kind of gone past, and thou shalt see my back parts, but my face shall not be seen. And when I was a kid, I was like, what is this talking about? It makes, you scratch your head or it makes no sense, or it's like, wait a minute, because actually he was talking to him face to face, or it says he spoke to Moses face to face earlier in the.
That's right.
It is a constellational. It is showing. Look, Moses, I just said, is Ophiuchus.
Yeah.
Hercules is he's covering as he goes by with his hand. See the outstretched arm, and he's allowing him to see his hinder parts or his back parts of the constellation.
Yeah.
This plays out in different myths in all different ways. You could see Ophiuchus as carrying a sickle there to, sometimes in Greek myths, the next generation of gods will castrate the father It's like the sickle is like pointing right up almost between the legs of the god. But you can see how Ophiuchus is, right below Hercules in this case. So Hercules, I don't talk about this all the time, but I do write about it. And Hercules plays the role of the god of the Bible quite a lot. And so the son of a Hercules figure will often be an Ophiuchus figure. Or in the case of Athena, she's the daughter of Zeus. See how she's descended from, if Zeus is associated with Hercules, Athena, with her spear, she leaps full grown out of the head of Zeus.
Yes.
And there she is right below. She's full grown, you can see right there below Hercules. Well, how does this apply to now the problematic passage that everybody, chariots of the gods, ancient aliens, must be, this must be talking about aliens that came to Earth and did genetic modification on humans, right?
Yep.
You mentioned earlier, you're in quite a little niche here. There's not that many people that are doing astrotheology. It's like, if I go to the UFO conferences, they like chase me away because they're like, well, you want to say that this is all celestial.
Yeah. You're undermining us.
It is all celestial. I can show you this is not literal. Those guys are just taking it literally in a different way. Oh, it's UFOs.
I'd love to see a conversation with you and Eric Von Daniken at some point.
Well, the vision of Ezekiel is not about ancient spaceships. It's celestial.
Yeah. But can I just say, that's how I found you, David.
Oh, that's right. You said that.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated because I read the Bible back to front many times, and I would get stuck on passages like this one, the Genesis 6, and the vision of Ezekiel, and obviously the book of Revelation, trying to figure them out, like you were trying to do with the cleft of a rock verse. And I would just get stuck on it over and over. What is this saying? And when I went into astrology, I was like, well, obviously this is astrological. Then it all made sense, Sorry, for people who aren't familiar with the Ezekiel story, he sees this vision of a being or a machine or something with the head of a man, the head of a lion, the head of a bull, and the head of an eagle, which obviously represent the fixed signs of the zodiac. And I could never understand, okay, I get what it's saying, but why? Why is this important? What's the big deal about the fixed signs more than the cardinal signs, Why the fixed signs? And it wasn't until I saw your video that the penny dropped, and I was like, because in the times of Ezekiel, the fixed signs were where we had all the solstices and equinoxes. So thank you so much. You've solved a problem that I've had for 20 years or more. Thank you.
Wow, I'm very happy to hear that. And,
it's a wonderful video, but sorry, back to this one.
Well, it's I love to hear that it's had a positive impact. So you did ask specifically, you said somewhere in one of your emails to me, well, I just can't help myself. I know I'm getting ahead of things, but do you have any explanations for this daughters of men, giants, sons of God? So it came to pass, this is starting in Genesis 6, right there in verse 1. So you see verses 1 through 4, I've laid them out, separated them by verses. It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. It's actually where did that come from? How does that relate to the previous verse? In Mesopotamian myths, the flood, this is right before the flood. The flood has to do with the people are multiplying too much, and they're making so much noise that the gods can't get any rest. And so they say, you know what? We've got to wipe these people out. They're just too noisy. They're multiplying. And I guess they're living too long. So the population is getting what? We've got to quiet it down. And actually the book of Enoch expands on this a lot more, which is, you get a little bit more of that. This is connected to the flood because the mighty offspring here of the sons of God and the daughters of men were causing too much trouble. But this is related to the same pattern that's found in other myths around the world. The Lord said, so I'm going to have to limit his days to 120 years. That will solve the problem. Yep.
Because prior to the flood, they were living like Methuselah for nearly 1,000 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
There were giants in the earth in those days. So here's where we get to giants. And also after that, when the sons of God came in under the daughters of men, they bare children to them. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown, powerful, heroic. Their tales were told down through and I was just watching a fellow Australian of yours, Ben from Uncharted X. Everyone should check out his videos; are fantastic. He's looking closely at the stones of Egypt, showing this Uncharted X, videos. This clearly shows ancient technology, clearly circular saws, clearly precision. He works a lot with Christopher Dunn, who talks about that. And in one of his most recent videos, he was talking about these legends of a golden age, these descendants of the gods. The Egyptians, or the people very, very ancient, obviously had some memory of some predecessor culture that was very advanced. And this may actually be related to that. But who are these sons of God? Well, I just went through kind of a long Moses, cleft of the rock. Who's God in that passage? Hercules. Or who's God associated with? The story is based on Hercules over Ophiuchus. Who are the sons of God who are gigantic? Who's descended directly below Hercules there?
Ophiuchus.
That's the sons of God. That's the giants. And Ophiuchus plays giants all the time around the world. Ophiuchus plays Goliath. Ophiuchus plays the giants in the Norse myths all the time, over and over. That Thor is always fighting. Which constellation do you think Thor might be associated with? Thunder god, Hercules. Okay. So who are the daughters that they go in unto? Well, I have to move the text out of the way. Hopefully everyone memorized it in the time that I had it up there. Here is Sagittarius, the beautiful outline of Sagittarius. Why is Sagittarius a horse? I could show that, but this is the HA ray outline. If you add another line, it becomes a centaur, and actually there is a tail. But for right now, let's look at it as a beautiful figure in a long skirt or dress. Often plays a goddess, often plays a beautiful goddess, often plays a beautiful woman bathing in a river or in a grotto, because where's the Milky Way? That's the brightest and widest part of the Milky Way. That's the galactic center. So Sagittarius is located right there at this widening of the Milky Way. So sometimes it's a beautiful goddess bathing in the river, like unfortunate Actaeon, when he's hunting, stumbles across Artemis with her bow.
Oh, I hate that story. The poor guy.
Yes, another traumatic, terrifying story. But all of this is a system. This is a system that's conveying these powerful truths. Well, that's, I would argue, the daughters of men that they see. In fact, a lot of times, King David, whom I'm named after in the Bible, David is often seeing, beautiful women too, just like Zeus. Who do you think David, if he fights Goliath, I just said Goliath is a giant associated with Ophiuchus.
He's Hercules.
Hercules, yeah. And actually he has a lyre right up next to his hip there. If you look above his hip, there's Lyra, the lyre. I didn't draw it in.
Right, yeah.
And of course, David is a psalmist, the sweet singer of Israel with the harp, right? That you can find on a bottle of Guinness there, same harp. So that's David up there. Does he see a woman bathing in a beautiful, beautiful woman? Anywhere in the Bible? Bathsheba. And where is he when he sees her? He's up on the
rooftop.
Yeah. Do you see, does Hercules look like he might be standing on a roof in any way compared to Ophiuchus?
He's certainly above Ophiuchus.
Yeah, but look at Ophiuchus. Look at the rectangle, and then there's a triangle on top. Like if I was a kid drawing a house.
Yes. Oh, of course. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
He's up on the roof. He's up on the roof, and he sees a beautiful woman bathing down there below Ophiuchus. So that's the beautiful figure that the daughters of men, the sons of God, the giant Ophiuchus figures, go in and take wives of the daughters of men. They're attracted, just like Zeus is attracted to, sometimes Zeus descends as a swan,
Yes.
Just at the very top, there's the figure of Cygnus, the swan, is at the very top of the Milky Way there. But sometimes he descends as a shower of gold, actually, in the story of Perseus and the birth of Perseus. So often Zeus is looking down and saying, ooh, look at that beautiful woman down there. I'd like to have sex with her. In the David story, it's the same thing. He's looking down there. In the daughters of men and the sons of God, that's the same. I would argue that's the same seductive, beautiful figure that they are saying, ooh, I'd like to take wives from the daughters of men. And then also, we talked a little bit about Virgo earlier. So let me bring back in. I shifted to a wider screen here.
Yeah.
Here we have Ophiuchus again. Everyone should recognize by now. There's Hercules above. And then we also just introduced Sagittarius. But on the other side of Ophiuchus we've seen Virgo. Yeah, see her outstretched arm, see her legs elevated and apart. That's Virgo, the Virgin. So then after, the sons of God took the daughters of men to wife, they had these giant offspring who were mighty men of renown. So they must have gotten pregnant, and maybe the story shifts over here to Virgo, and she has a baby there, Ophiuchus. See how she looks like she's about to give birth?
Yes.
So Ophiuchus figures will often be the offspring of a Virgo figure. Wow. So these sons of men, or the daughters of men, after they have sex with the sons of God, have children that are the mighty men of renown, the giants who were in the earth in the old days, and they're associated with Ophiuchus as well. And I can show another Bible story that everyone's familiar with, where there's a serpent who will bite the heel of the offspring of Eve.
Yeah, Genesis.
Yes, Genesis 3:15, I think. Yeah. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. This is God addressing the serpent in the Garden of Eden. It shall bruise thy head, but thou shalt bruise his heel. So who's the daughter, or who's the seed of the woman? If the woman is giving birth, I argue that Virgo is Eve in this case. She even has an outstretched arm to pluck the fruit, right? So the prophecy says her offspring, now you see it, right? Her offspring, her seed, will have enmity with the seed of the serpent, or the offspring of the serpent. It shall bruise thy head. Her offspring will bruise your head. But on the other hand, your offspring, or you, shall bruise his heel. Do you see anyone biting the heel of Ophiuchus there? Right there, the little bruising the head. So Ophiuchus is standing on Scorpio at the same time that Scorpio looks like it could be biting the heel. I mean, like literally right next to the heel. There's the heel. So
can I ask who might sorry to interrupt, but who might Adam be if Virgo is Eve? And
yes, I got a whole video about that, actually.
Oh, sorry. No, people can go watch it there, and I'll go watch it there too.
No, nothing wrong with asking it. He's not as positive, but I argue that he is actually right above Virgo. There is Boötes, this constellation Boötes. He looks like he's sitting there smoking a pipe, actually.
Right. And, no, I ask because in the New Testament, Jesus is referred to as the new Adam.
Adam, yeah. Jesus is mostly associated with Ophiuchus, but sometimes Aquarius. As you might imagine, he pours out wine. Yes. And he also separates the sheep from the goats, which might be
Capricorn and Aries.
Capricorn and Aries are on either side of Aquarius. And he says the sign of the Son of Man coming in the heavens. Like all that is celestial. But when they're cast out from the garden, in the verses just that I'm quoting here, the serpent is cast out first, then the woman, then the man. So actually, you can see the tail of Hydra.
Yes.
The serpent is actually, first he has to eat dust. Hydra is like right along the western horizon as it's sinking. Hydra gets cast out first. The serpent gets cast out. So Hydra could be the parent of Scorpio, but just his tail is kind of pointing towards Libra. That's in between Virgo and Scorpio. If you're familiar, there, right in between the tail. There's a tail going down under the ground. That's the serpent getting cast out. Then the woman gets cast out. That's why Virgo goes next. Then the man gets cast out. Boötes. Okay. And also the passage says, from dust thou came. the eastern horizon. You rose up out of the eastern horizon.
Yes.
Now you're going to return to you've been cruising through the glorious heavens, but now you're sinking down into the dust again.
So the heavens in that story would be the Garden of Eden.
They are the Garden of Eden. They are paradise.
Mm.
They are that celestial realm. The heavens are the heaven that we're trying to get back to.
Yes, yes.
This story is actually full of trauma, right? They're naked and unashamed. Then next thing you know, they're full of shame. And then now they're blaming each other. Well, no, she did it. No, she gave it to me. No, it was the serpent. And they're being divided from nature. It's full of trauma. And it's all about recovering from trauma and recovering self. The stories are all about that. So, but the reason I bring it up here is to show, to add some supporting evidence to prove that the offspring of Virgo is sometimes Ophiuchus. Yes. So I'm trying to build an argument for you here, Kesenya, to support my assertion that this story about the daughters of men and the sons of God is celestial. It's celestial. It's not literal UFO or angels. It is actually talking about our condition here. We're a mixture. We're cast out of the garden. We're in this lower realm. It's actually the realm of Poseidon. I mean, that's where Odysseus is roaming around through the oceans trying to get back home. That's where we are. We're in the lower realm. So, I just mentioned, this is a drawing I did. I was trying to draw.
You're very talented.
Thanks. This is I'm working on some figure drawing, but this is the Thrustness Model. This is from the Elder Edda, from the Norse myths are preserved. And Odin is always wandering around trying to find out wisdom. Specifically, he's trying to find out more about Ragnarok and the fate of the gods. But he often goes to the giants because the giants are full of wisdom. And so Ophiuchus figures are almost always associated with, or giants are almost always associated with Ophiuchus. And so Vafthrûdnir Mal, he goes to this giant named Vafthrûdnir, whose name means in Old Norse, mighty weaver. Mighty weaver, that's the name. Vafthrûdnir means mighty weaver. So he goes to this giant. Can you see Odin as Sagittarius consulting a giant Ophiuchus?
Yeah.
Now, Odin is actually sometimes criticized for dressing up as a woman or having.
Really? Oh.
Yeah. There are some kind of Sagittarius figures will play male and female characters.
Interesting.
I've spent a lot of time saying that Sagittarius plays a lot of beautiful women, but also Apollo, I think, is associated. Apollo is the twin of Artemis, and I believe they're both Sagittarius figures. Sometimes Achilles, there's stories of Achilles where he's dressed as a girl when he's growing up, and then later he's turned into a goat, which is Capricorn, right next to Sagittarius. Also, Dionysus, as a child, was dressed as a woman to escape Hera because she was out to get him. So Odin is sometimes criticized as pursuing magic and divination, which is supposed to be for women in the Norse tradition, or he's kind of like a boundary crossing god. And in this case, when he's consulting with the giants, I think he's associated with Sagittarius. And you can see also there's like a little rope coming out of the top of the head of Sagittarius, or a feather. Odin is the hanged god, just like the hanged man on the tarot. Tarot cards. But so Odin so you see how Ophiuchus could be a giant in the Norse myths is what I'm trying to show.
Yeah. And I was just going to say that's very interesting. You made a correlation a moment ago about the women being the ones with the esoteric knowledge and what have you, which is exactly what was given. It goes into it in the book of Enoch, not so much in Genesis, these gods of renown or heroes of old give the knowledge of all sorts of like makeup and medicine and astrology to the women that they procreate with. So that's right. Seeing the correlation.
That causes all the problems. All that makeup.
Definitely, it's evil.
But yes, that is a pattern that's, here we're seeing it in the Norse myths. So, is there a connection? Yes, it's all part of this ancient system. And in the Bible, I just got a few, people can look these verses up, but the giants in the Bible, biblical stories, will almost always be described as having a spear that's as big or as large as do you know?
No, carry on.
It's a weaver's beam.
Okay.
A weaver's beam. You'll see it in these verses specifically. The first one's about Goliath's spear was as big as a weaver's beam, but down there in Chronicles, there are some other giants, and they carry spears that are as big as a weaver's beam. Remember Vafthrûdnir, this giant that Odin goes and consults in the Poetic Edda, his name means the mighty weaver. Why would the giants have a spear as big as a weaver's beam? Because they're Ophiuchus. Why would Ophiuchus have anything to do with weaving? It's because the loom that you weave at, which by the way, there's lots of looms in the Odyssey. We talked about Penelope. She's always weaving. The suitors are after her saying, will you please marry me? And then I, can inherit the kingdom and, we'll be happy. And she says, sure, just as soon as I finish this tapestry. So all day she weaves it. And then at night she undoes it every night, which I think is a biting ancient image of self-sabotage in a way. Or, I mean, she's being very clever, but how do we feel like sometimes we're weaving things and then tearing them apart? We're stuck in this kind of repetitive pattern.
Yep.
But anyway,
Ophiuchus,
yeah. Can you see how Ophiuchus looks like a loom?
Yeah.
The two pillars on either side there.
Yes.
So all that to say that the books that you asked about, or the episodes that you asked about in both the Book of Enoch and in the Genesis passage that it corresponds to, I'm convinced are celestial. I think the evidence is overwhelming, if a bit esoteric. I mean, it takes a bit of an explanation for me to lay this out, but hopefully people can start to kind of see what I'm saying about the myths are based on the stars. The stories, the patterns, the figures, the characters are based on specific constellations. And so, I can pause.
I think you've given
wrapping up here. Yeah,
I'm
wrapping up.
I think you've given a beautiful explanation. It's so clear how they correspond. And the more you look into it, the more you can see the linkages and the synchronicities. So I mentioned before we started recording that I've been really diving deep into visual astrology. You can keep it up there. We can.
Okay, I was going to stop share so that people could see you talking.
Oh, okay. Yeah, how I'm really going into visual astrology, which requires getting out under the stars and observing where they're sitting and the declinations of the planets, rather than just looking at a map all the time. Things take on a much more holistic thing. And so being able to look at what you've just described, they take on a whole a new story, a whole new imparting of knowledge for us to garner. So that's all I wanted to say. You can go back to your beautiful presentation.
That's exactly what I believe, that's why the ancient myths are using this incredible canvas. Sometimes I say Moby Dick is this, this novel where the author wanted to find something so vast and so awe-inspiring and so fearsome. So he used the great whales and the vast oceans and all the sea imagery, and the heavens are even more an infinite ocean, so vast, and they really represent the infinite. What was Herman Melville talking about in Moby Dick? He was talking about fate, predestination, all these deep subjects.
Yeah.
That's what the ancient myths are using, this infinite realm, to teach us about these profound things that are, these invisible truths, to make them visible for us, using these beautiful metaphors. So I'll just, let me just show, see that diagram there. Let me just show you what I think is going on. This is just like a brief to type out, since you and your, listeners, watchers, viewers, friends,
all of the above,
are so knowledgeable about this. This is a way. All the zodiac diagrams is a way of trying to shorthand or two-dimensionally represent what's going on in what I was showing with Stellarium. The motions of the stars throughout the year, the motions of the sun, moon, planets through those background constellations. And so all of your viewers, I'm sure, are familiar with this. Is from early 1600s, this layout. I happen to like the clockwise, but of course, nothing is really going around a piece of paper.
No.
It doesn't go clockwise or counterclockwise on the paper. You could lay it out to go counterclockwise and it works just as well. This is like sheet music to try and represent real music.
Yeah.
So there's Virgo.
It's not showing, outline, David. Sorry.
Oh, it's not showing? Oh, because I'm not sharing. I'm doing all this talking. I was doing all this talking, but I didn't press share first. Let me get back to where I can do that. There, share screen. So let me just finish off with the zodiac diagram that I was talking to without showing. Here it is.
Perfect.
Everyone's familiar. I've chosen one that I like because of the way it's laid out. I like the way this one's laid out. It is going around clockwise. It is from the early 1600s. The reason it's so handy also is because this is the age of Aries layout, and won't get off into the changing of the ages, but you've referenced it, and it's certainly going on in the myths for sure. Very prominent in the myths. That's actually what Hamlet's Mill, they were dead on in identifying processional imagery in the myths long before anyone was supposed to have known about precession.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of like your point about Neptune, long before we even knew where Neptune was, or rediscovered, because probably in ancient times
they knew it
more. Yeah,
exactly.
Someone knew more. But anyway, the way this is laid out is so handy because you've got your equinoxes. I've drawn a horizontal line that's not in the original 1600s, where the two equinoxes are. So if we're going around clockwise, we get to this, we call it the spring equinox. Or this is the fall equinox for us. It's spring down there.
Yeah.
But this is the August or September. Sorry, September. Like we're just a few days away from it. This is the September equinox, which is fall equinox up here in the northern hemisphere, and that's where we've got the days are longer in the northern hemisphere. It crosses over to being days are shorter. So longer above, shorter below. Everyone in southern hemisphere cross those out and switch them. But
this is when the sun will ingress into Libra also, everybody, just so you know.
So there it is, that crossing point. And I put two X's for the crossing points. So which do you think would represent our life here in this world? And which would represent the darkness of the grave and death? Is it the cold, dark part of the year where days are shorter and we have winter? Or is the upper part of the sunny year? This is a trick question. You can tell by the way I'm leading in with all this. Which would be our life here in this world? This is what Alvin Boyd Kuhn is he's the one who really opened my eyes to this. He didn't necessarily connect it up with the constellations, but he connected up with the stations of the year, the equinoxes and he understood the cycle of the year was used esoterically, and the colder, darker, wintry part, would that be our life here in the body, or would that be death?
It's definitely death.
Death, right? I think that's death in the grave, but you'd be wrong. According to Alvin Boyd Kuhn, he argues we are down here in the lower realm, the realm of confusion, the realm of darkness. When we're in between, the celestial realm is like, that's the spirit realm. That's where you were before you were born, where you'll be in between. That's the celestial, or that's the realm of the gods. We're mostly running around down here. Most of the myth action happens in what I would call the lower part of the year for the northern hemisphere, the colder part of the year, the winter part of the year, between Libra. So where is birth going to happen on this cycle? Born into a body. If you come down from the celestial realm and then you transition, like you said, or the ingress, you ingress into a body at Virgo and Libra.
Yes.
So Virgo is like the first mother. And then you head down into the lower days of the lower half, down to the shortest day of the year, which is the December equinox for us.
Yeah.
That's the longest day of the year for you guys. But so we have another vertical line. We could divide this also into days are getting shorter or days are getting longer. On the right, they're getting shorter. On the left, they're getting longer. But as we plunge down into this life, it happens at the September equinox in this myth system.
Yeah.
And we go down and we get even more into confusion. We get even more tangled up in all the, illusions and, or more control, or our higher self gets even more suppressed.
Yep.
As we get tangled up into society and our parents tell us no, or we encounter traumas, or we try and hide part of who we are because of society, or all the
a contraction of self because days are getting shorter and smaller.
Yes. So it's using all this metaphor, but there's a shortest point where there's a turning.
Yay.
And then we go, and that's what the myths are. And so they use the solstices and the equinoxes as like markers for things that we are experiencing. So we are born into the first birth here, then we, plunge down, but then there's this second birth that's actually down there in between Sagittarius and Capricorn, the second mother. A lot of times in myths, there's two mothers. There's two Marys in the Gospels. There's Isis and Nephthys in the Osiris and Horus stories, two mothers a lot of times. Or there's two mothers in the Solomon story of the one mother who's kind of the cursing mother, and there's the other mother who's the blessing mother, the one who says, no, save the child. And the other one says, no, cut it up. I like that. So it's esoteric. Nobody has two physical mothers. That's impossible. But esoterically, we have a second birth down here. That's where the things turn around and we start going back up. But unfortunately, we don't get out that way.
So when would you like in the metaphor, when is this rebirth? I mean, I think Christians would say when you are born again,
that is the second birth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Born again is a pattern around the world.
Yeah. But like, is it when you awaken, when reality, you see reality clearly, or what would be the correspondence with our life?
Well, I argue that the myths, they're operating on multiple levels. So this could, could be talking about birth, and death, but really I believe this is more because we don't really need elaborate myths to tell us that, we're born.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Right. And you're going to die. Okay, good. Couldn't you just tell me that without myths?
Yeah.
What is actually, I think more likely is it is teaching us about reconnection with self. And that is hard and has to be conveyed in stories because we have all these defense mechanisms, which if you start telling somebody about higher self, I'm sure in Australia, if I go into a bar and order a Guinness or a Newcastle or a whatever, Foster's, and I say to the guy next to me, hey, I was surfing all day today and I feel like I'm getting closer to my higher self. He'd probably like hit me. Like it's threatening. I don't want to talk about higher self. Like that's like, I've got defense mechanisms which say, don't talk to me about that higher self stuff because we're getting along just fine here. I've got all these parts of me who are trying to drive the car and they figured out how to drive the car over the years. And they're like, I'm getting along just fine. Don't bring that self in here that I stuffed in the trunk and ask him to take the wheel. I don't want to give up the wheel. It's threatening because we experience trauma where we had to separate from self. And the psychologists talk about all the ways that this happens, but it happens actually without our even knowing it. Like we have, the child will actually separate because it's less threatening to separate from higher self in traumatic, but will do so without knowing it and suppress. And so when higher self tries to come back and say, I could actually drive that car a lot better. And you might feel like you're going in circles right now. I could get you out of that. Or you might feel like sometimes you're self-sabotaging the way you drive, or I could actually help a lot with that. And it's like we're clutching the steering wheel, like, get him out of here. I've got this, and so we need this illustrated in a way that gets past those defenses and speaks to the deeper, because that is the natural response is shut up. with that higher self-talk. I'm sick of it. You know, it's a defense mechanism. It's threatening. Yes. Nobody wants to be told, you know, you had a lot of trauma when you were a child and you separated from yourself. Like, shut up. I'm trying to forget that. So what I believe that second birth has to do with is reconnecting with higher self. And it has to do with that path of Ophiuchus in the Milky Way that I talked about. That is what it's trying to depict. And it's not like, okay, I've connected with higher self. Now the rest of my life, I'm going to be guided by higher self. It's not like that. I don't think it's like that. No. I don't think Dr. Schwartz says it's like that. It's like we have to work on bringing back this self, or letting that self come back to the surface that we've buried. We've buried it. You see it being buried on this diagram as just a simple process of being in society and dealing with other people, having parents, going to kindergarten, being told, oh no, you can't do that. Or, you know, you can't express that side of who you are, or whatever. Or you were courageous. You know, Dr. Schwartz talks about this. You stood up against your father who was trying to beat your mother, but you were 5 and you got punished, like physically. And the defense parts of your mind said, let's not do that anymore. Hey, courageous instincts of higher self, we better learn how to suppress that courage and suppress it for survival's sake. So, I mean, there's lots of examples of how this happens. So it will actually be suppressed, but it can come right back to the surface. And the myths are showing you actually have that. Everybody has that. You have access to that right beneath the surface, just waiting there. You have access to that figure who, all those characteristics that Jesus is displaying are characteristics that the higher self, that everybody has: compassion, courage, calmness, clarity, knowing what to do. Or that the Buddha is a figure of your higher self, and is associated with Ophiuchus, by the way. So this, so I believe that second birth in the myths is actually talking about when that higher self, or when you start getting back in touch with self. And it is a process that, you know, you go back and forth, you get in this spin cycle here.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Sorry, it's really interesting as an astrologer. So often I will tell people what I am seeing in their stars, and the response from people after they've had a reading is, oh, you know, I felt that was true, and you've just confirmed what I'm feeling.
I already knew it.
Yeah, they already know every single time, but we've lost the ability to trust our higher self and trust our internal guidance. So we look for it outside of us. Oh, let's get an astrology reading, or let's get a tarot reading or something, when really it's there. And what an astrologer does is just reveal to people what they already know deep within them. But like you say, we've been traumatized and lost touch with this inner knowing that we have.
That's so powerful what you just said. That's so exactly right. And Dr. Schwartz talks about that as a psychologist. He says, actually, you can't heal the trauma. You can't who can put you back in touch with yourself? Who else can put you back in touch with yourself? You've got to get in touch with. I can't get you in touch with yourself. Exactly. I can only get in touch with myself. But as a therapist, if you can, and I'm not, so don't mistake me for one, I'm not trying to act like I am one. But what Dr. Schwartz teaches the people in his paradigm who are, you know, becoming healers is what you have to do is help that patient get in touch with that self that can heal that trauma. And it's the same thing. I don't hold myself out as this guru that, you know, come ask me. I'm trying to point people to the myths and that ancient wisdom that they have, because you're the star of those stories. And if you go there, I think you'll get the answers.
Absolutely. And that passion of mine as well is to teach. That's what I really want to do, is to teach people to be able to understand their own stars and their own chart, what it's saying to them. Because, you know, the old adage, you can give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, but if you teach a man to fish, he's going to eat for the rest of his life. So understanding ourselves and connecting that to the stars is just a mighty work, I think. And I'm just loving what you're doing and how you're leading people to that point, similarly to what astrologers do. It's just great.
Well, thanks so much. I think that, this is like a great note that we've gotten to, but it almost feels like it's like you can tell when you're starting to feel like the quality of self kind of coming to the surface. You actually feel it. Like I'll feel like my teeth will unclench sometimes. I'll be like, I won't even know that I was clenching my jaw or my fists or something,
Yeah.
And then I'll like say a mantra or something in my head, and actually I'll like feel my hands ungrip.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, ooh, that's different feeling.
Yeah.
And it's like at the end of a really deep conversation, sometimes it's like you've gotten to that level where you feel like it's like your voice even changes.
Yeah.
Your voice even changes.
There's a releasing. It's beautiful. Well, David, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge. I mean, I just want to keep asking you about all sorts of different things. We haven't even gotten to the planets and their role and that sort of thing in the mythologies. But so maybe, I don't know, maybe one day we have you back again and talk about some other stuff. But if you want to check out David's work, guys, the link to his website will be in the description below. Do check out his YouTube channel. He has like a breadth of work on all different mythologies and explaining them like he's done for us here today. So also books are available as well through David's website. You also have a massive blog of different articles. Like they just do so much work, and so make the most of it and grow your knowledge through all David's wonderful work. David, thank you so much for joining us, and we'd love to have you back again another time.
Well, thank you so much, Kesenya, and thanks for what you're doing, and I wish you all the best. And thanks for your interest in my work and your support of my work. Thanks for buying the book. Sure. I'm glad it got to you. Wonderful. It was really wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. Okay, bye, everybody.